We are in the process of getting an Italy playlist together. There's a lot more to get in there. So far, it's, well, tell you what, why not right-click at the top and see for yourself. But after a 3-parter on Sicily from the spring, in the summer of the same year, we were filling in something you might assume we'd already done. This was a first time in Rome because, look, we're trying, but we're not rich, and our completed map of Europe and beyond currently looks like this. Now, this is probably redundant for anyone who's caught our stuff before, but just a quick explainer. Like, a couple of years ago, as the focus of the channel was shifting towards ancient history, I began less and less filming the in-between bits that would make up a travel explainer, things like transport links, accommodations, cups of coffee, those sorts of things. For example, we did a trip like this to Cornwall, where I didn't bother with the extras, as we were very much doing it on the cheap, and, instead, I just filmed a ton of standing stones and all the Neolithic goodness. Thing is, as it turned out, this was somehow less fun. I had grown used to documenting the journey, even if it was the trivial, ephemeral things. I just genuinely enjoyed telling the story of the process as a whole, rather than just chaining one ancient site together with another. Now, all of that said, when it comes to Rome, this is Rome. It's one of the most visited cities in Europe. I mean, what would be the use in making a generic when in Rome episode, trying to compete with, forget competing with other YouTube channels. At that point, you're pretty much competing with broadcast TV. So, to be clear, I am making no attempt at making the greatest Roman episode ever. That's just ridiculous. I'm not chasing Insta spots around the city. You must know by now that our area of interest is all things ancient, so to keep myself from going crazy, I was very much approaching this first visit as just that, the notion that I would absolutely return in subsequent years and patch in the numerous gaps. To be honest, a large number of you have probably already been, so I don't see a lot of use in trying to meticulously signpost you around. As for our trip, it's our usual pattern: 5 a.m. starts, ancient ruins, and enough espresso to make you blind. So, managed some pretty nice shots of the Italian west coast on our flight in. A big part of this trip, we've done northern Italy at least 4 times, see the previous episodes, and we've been around Sicily twice, but we've not actually filled in the middle yet. A shuttle bus from the airport, not especially riveting stuff. In fact, we took this first day slowly, which means footage is patchy. We arrived at our room, which, as well as this perfectly Wes Andersonian elevator, shared the building with the Zimbabwean embassy, which is fun. Started off with an espresso and a pizza because, well, look at where we are. We were staying in a neighbourhood just by this huge building, which apparently is the Supreme Court. And crossing the river, we began tentatively exploring some of the historic gems of the city. Rather than filming lots of details, I spent the first day more or less just getting the impressions of the site with the hope of coming back to film properly later. So we saw the Piazza Navona, a pretty famous square, probably most known for its fountains and obelisk, but was also a former Roman stadium that morphed into the apartment buildings, a basilica, and all the rest. Round to the Pantheon, briefly, definitely more of that later, past the Argentine Square, and past the Roman Forum, had to at least get a first look at, well, okay, not as majestic from a first glance with the building hoardings in frame, but at long last, seeing the Flavian Amphitheatre with our own eyes. While I only got a select few shots at this point, I just feel so satisfying doing these smooth pans left to right, right to left. It was all a lot to take in, and we'd be back. So we started the homeward loop, but it added to the list of recurring themes. The round trip from, so this was approximately level with Fort St. Angelo to the Colosseum. It's not an inconsiderable trek, and I kept underestimating it, like, oh, come on, dude, just quit whining and jog if it's taking too long, but it always took way longer than I anticipated to get where we were going. We took a slightly longer way back to see a couple of other things on this first day, but multiply it with the heat, and it was doable, but not comfortably. Anyway, this first day was really just to see the place more than it was for the sake of an episode, so day 2, the first full day, and with that in mind, 5:45 start. This was 1,000% worth it, as it offered some gorgeous views by the river and a view of St. Peter's Basilica from afar, bathed in the red of the rising sun. This wasn't even the main thing I'd set out to film, but it was massively worth it. Then through the piazza and onto the Pantheon by about 6:45, at which point it had something like 15 or 20 of us, either cameras in hand or being photographed, what looked like a wedding shoot. This was a much better view than I'd managed the previous day. I did get a little further, but couldn't linger too long as I needed to double back and get Jen. So, quick espresso on the way back. It was okay, not going to change lives. Something we found in Rome is that there's no shortage of somewhat cheap, somewhat mediocre places doing Italian food or coffee, and that's not the complaint that it might sound. We were consciously trying to keep our budget down on this trip, so, I think we got what we paid for. We did aim inexpensive. Well, back out into town with Jen. As far as Rome goes, there's ancient parts kind of everywhere you go, but these become even more dense on the eastern bank of the Tiber, and most of all in this massive chunk just to the west of the amphitheatre. And this area is largely split into two archaeological parks. The busier of the two areas is the lower area, the Forum, so we opted first thing to head to the southeastern gate and the Palatine Hill. Now, pro, it was very quiet and cooler in this part of the morning at opening. Con, the shadows are a bit sharp for some of the things I wanted to photograph, but, just worked with what we've got. I'm not going to go blow by blow everything that's here because there's a huge amount, but something I quickly came to realise, and I have to put this somewhere, and it might as well be here. I'm struggling to put this across without seeming like I'm being unbelievably stupid. But as far as historic things to see in Rome, actually, to make this point, let's take a famous comparison. Let's go with Athens. I know you say that name, and everyone's mind's eye instantly goes to the Parthenon. And okay, sure, while we're at it, we'll include the Erechtheion and all the other parts on the top of the Acropolis and then around the city. So we're talking the Temple of Hephaestus, the Tower of the Winds, Hadrian's Arch, the Temple of the Olympian Zeus, even that's mostly held up by scaffolding. Well, what does that leave us with? Well, a lot of the rest of the city is fragmentary or it's uncovered archaeology. Now, don't you dare assume we're down on Athens. We've got a whole Greece playlist to counter that assumption, and we're still far from done. But let's just say history that is still standing at height is more the exception, and uncovered archaeology is more the rule. And if we parallel that to Roman Britain, say, there's a few things standing at decent height. The Pharos at Dover, that's pretty rad. Portchester Castle, the miraculously well-preserved Roman fort, okay. And yeah, there's clusters at Hadrian's Wall and plenty of pleasant surprises around the country, but again, it's fragments. And nowhere is this more the case than London. It's a modern capital, and credit where it's due, while there are fragments, they've been very well cared for, whether it's the Mithraeum or the Vine Street Roman Wall, even the scraps, the absolute scraps of the amphitheatre have been given their own kind of building. So you get it. When you're a European capital, sure, it's nice to preserve some of the Roman layers, but also, you've got underground rail lines to build and big office blocks and so on. So yeah, expect lots of those. Okay, so circling back to Rome then, how does this compare? I mean, it's a capital city. How much has survived? Well, look, it's absolutely bad. I mean, ruins that are 2,000 years old are not supposed to survive at 5-6 stories high. That never happens. And it keeps getting more ridiculous. You might not catch this detail, but the real miracle here is not that the Romans built these vast structures, but that 2,000 years have gone by with no one quarrying them for stone. Or, saying, who left this derelict building here? Let's get rid of this eyesore and put something useful there. Whether it's the Aurelian Walls, or the Baths of Trajan, or the Baths of Caracalla, or the Amphitheatre, or the Basilica of Maxentius, or just any number of other monuments which haven't been excavated or re-stood up. Granted, some restoration, a bit of TLC, but mostly these buildings of 3+ stories high are still standing 2,000 years on. And if you don't realise how unusual that is, then you clearly haven't circled Europe looking at Roman stuff for very long at all. I mean, look, I thought Western Turkey was luxury mode. We spent 3 episodes crisscrossing that, playlist in the top right. And for all the theatres and pillars standing upright and everything, it still doesn't stack up to what you can see in the city of Rome. And sure, by all means, pretend that you already knew this. Roll your eyes that Rome, yes, has some of the best Roman remains. But what you're missing is the incredible fortune that all of these were not turned into apartment buildings in the 19th century. The fact that for 1,500-ish years, someone has said, hey, look, this might be a ruin, but it's worth keeping. Don't tear that down. Just trust me on this, or don't. But I got completely blindsided by just how impressive all the Roman stuff is in Rome. Okay? So, we were having a great morning, but keeping myself very busy. We ended up at the viewpoint overlooking the city, and after dipping into the Palatine Museum, which I do highly recommend, we did duck down to have a first pass at the Forum. And of the many things down there, a closer look at the Arch of Titus, all the way through to the Arch of Septimius Severus and everything in between. There's no way to go over every detail without making this feature length. Each of these buildings can support a modestly large book just on its own. I mean, for example, just look at this. It's a pretty plain brick building. I mean, obviously, it's just a modern eyesore that was... No, that's the Curia Julia, commissioned by Julius Caesar in 44 BC. It was formerly a Senate house. Kind of hits the point on the graph between sort of oldest and best preserved in the city. There's probably fewer 1st century BC and earlier structures in the city than you'd think. Every ruler and dynasty was pretty keen to leave their mark. I mean, just look at the waves of building projects undertaken in the Forum alone. That's right, not just one forum, but more like a sextuple forum palimpsest. Okay, so that was a lot of filming, and it was getting hotter and busier, and we generally needed to sit down. But not wanting to face the prices of any restaurant facing one of the biggest areas of tourist footfall in Europe, we ducked into some side streets to see what we could find, and some tacos from this place worked out for a cool but inexpensive lunch. We walked around, took a pause near the circus. This huge plot is what was formerly the chariot racing venue in Rome, and just to make sure we're all caught up on our ancient venues with large-scale seating terminology, yeah, there we go. So there's some of it surviving as masonry at the eastern end. About this point, the trip took... it's a bit of a strange turn. Look, I've had camera breaks on trips before, which is, pretty appalling, but out of nowhere, my trusty camera, which I think had been solid for about 3 years by this point, suddenly the on switch snapped off. There should be like a little plastic bit here. It was just gone. So, I mean, that's somewhat preferable to some sort of internal glitch or breakdown. The camera as a whole is, of course, still functional. It just led to the most ridiculous workaround. As pure luck would have it, I somehow had kept hold of a wooden toothpick from just a restaurant, I don't know. And for the rest of the trip, I had to have this in hand at all times, because any time I wanted a shot, I had to use it to nudge the on switch and then off again to save battery. And so the shutter count for this trip was 3,375 shots, totaling about 211 gig. And this is partway through day 2. So that made for an extra level of detail to all the filming. But, at least I didn't have to drop everything and find an electronics store like last time. Okay, more bits to catch. We went back to the apartment so Jen could get a rest, and so I could continue running around and nerding out. Headed for the Argentine Square. This includes the place where Caesar was assassinated, at least we think. Here's the thing, while you can pay entry to this site, the Roman ruins are several feet below current street level, and with views from all 4 sides, I can scarcely think of anywhere with better views from every conceivable angle. A little further south, and it's one of Rome's other specialities. Incredible ancient structures that have been incorporated into somewhat less ancient structures, like the Portico of Octavia or the Theatre of Marcello, whose spans are pretty well preserved. It's just that as you pan up, you run into more modern layers. And nearby, a pair of remarkably well-preserved temples. I will say, Rome is not an especially expensive city. I mean, all things considered, the inflation of everything everywhere has spiked so much in the last 18 months that already my price points of reference from this trip feel out of date. But other than accommodation and food, both of which have pretty cheap tiers if you're not snobbish, it's striking how much there is to see without paying entrance. The Forum I mentioned earlier, you can see almost all of that from the street. You might not get a close look or maybe all the snaps you want, but skipping forward to the morning of day 3 a second, look, here's me getting all the shots from the streets several hours before anything opens. So yeah, it's gratifying that so much is just out in the open to go and see. Well, after the day's scampering, this place was pretty highly recommended. They're not putting on airs and graces, but their pasta is pretty great, and as you can see, not expensive. So we did go a little further in the evening, bear in mind, from the crack of dawn, this day had been little else but walking for me. Like, absolute minimum, about 20 kilometres, but really, taking in the internal dimensions of sights and the little inefficiencies of taking side streets and doubling back on yourself, it was more like 22 or more. So while I didn't loudly object to heading back to the Forum to catch some of the monuments in the evening, you know, it was getting to be a lot. Look at those views on the way back, though. Okay, well, third day. The 5:45 start the previous day had not really given me enough time to film everything I wanted, so this time I got out the flat at just after 5. I will admit I had much less of a spring in my step for that one. With the very early mornings, you do get these weirdly intense thought patterns where everything's a bit jagged and like, ugh. Anyway, I got some really nice ones of Fort St. Angelo at first light, and then getting the rising sun kissing the top of the amphitheatre. That was really special. I already mentioned I was catching more of the Forum at this time, and on top of all this, I was now getting different shots of many of the things I've already mentioned just to get enough coverage. You always need way more than you think to make an episode like this. Having covered a fair distance, there was also things I hadn't caught yet. So not far from the Pantheon, the Temple of Hadrian. Pretty much just a facade of the Corinthian columns now, but still spectacular. And speaking of the Pantheon, this was the morning to go in. There's pretty massive queues, and I'd forgotten about this, but we're back to this again. We'd had this problem in Sicily. There's this Catholic thing of suddenly pretending that exposed knees are a massive problem. And then the man said unto Jesus, Teacher, what must I do to be saved? And Jesus said unto him,
Cover those degenerate knees, you absolute filth!
So I had to get Jen to bring me some jeans so we didn't get barred from entry. And look, as it turns out, there were no shortage of shorts inside here. It seems like this absurd aspiration to cover the legs of the population completely falls down as soon as you have modestly high footfall. I guess they got to realising that they'd be turning half of everyone away. So I don't know, don't expect to get in just a bikini, but otherwise, well, you can probably not worry. And also, can we just remember that this is a solar temple? The nerve to try and pretend that shorts are the true evil when you're hanging out trying to play church in the drinks lounge of, Sol Invictus. Anyway, sorry, I'm glazing over the Pantheon building itself to talk about clothing bands. If you didn't know, it's 2,000 years old, it's got this unsupported dome, and is no exaggeration one of the most spectacular structures over 2 millennia old in the entire world. And it's a massive, massive deal. Okay? Well, after that, a breakfast stop that was less than spectacular, took a walk a bit further, did glance past the Trevi Fountain. As everyone is keen to point out, this will not change your life. It's nice enough, crowds are a bit much. Headed a ways across town. Now, I already went into depth how Rome has just the most ludicrous assemblage of ruins compared with everywhere else. Well, this is quite possibly the best example of that. Everyone wants to talk big about the Flavian Amphitheatre, and a lot of people on their way past get a look at the Forum. Maybe that should be Fora, multiple forums. Anyway, these are all well and good, but if you're prepared to head a little further south, the Baths of Caracalla are ridiculous. Understand, everywhere you go, even grotty backwaters like Britain, you find the remains of bathhouses, and if you're heading for the glowing centre of the civilised world, it's no surprise that they're going to have the biggest bathhouses. What is surprising is that they're still here and standing at 5 to 6 stories high. For goodness sake, look at this! You can see the majority of the work here is brick, which might not be your first pick when picturing ancient Rome. Come on, admit it. You were picturing marble columns, right? Yeah, don't lie, there's no shame. That's certainly the Victorian view of Roman and Greek culture. But marble is expensive, and so it mostly gets used for temples or really bougie projects. Something as large as this, you need a more practical material. But again, I circle back to the minor miracle that this is still here. Unbelievable stuff. So that is hugely worth a visit. Okay, I knew this script was big, but my goodness, it was only when I sat down to record I realised just how much we've still got left. And we're not even inside the amphitheatre yet, or gotten to what I think might have been the highlight of the entire trip. All I can feasibly do at this stage is hit pause and split our remaining 3 days into part 2. So definitely come back for that soon. We'll kind of wrap up our concluding thoughts on the city then. I think people's expectation is that if you're going to Italy, you must be eating the best of the best, and anything less or being on, heavens forfend, a budget is simply not acceptable. Yes, of course, Italian food is great, but you don't have to be eating like a debauched emperor. Please feel empowered to go to Rome and have sub €10 mains. In the meantime, if you've enjoyed the music in the background, it's ours. We make all the music for these episodes, and you can find it on bandcamp.com. If you want to support the channel, that's the place to do it. I've been name dropping a lot of the playlists that we've got on the channel. It always makes me excited when people see more of what we do. So, please like and subscribe. And you'd be really helping us out if you followed us on the socials. But to be honest, if you check out some of the playlists, our journey through the Venetian Republic still remains one of the things I'm most proud of. And, not a lot of people have seen it compared to some of our other episodes. So yes, please have a look at those. Otherwise, we'll catch you very soon.